Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the one-year Bible. Today we're looking at the Psalm reading and Psalm 101, and we're talking about this manifesto of leadership. That's essentially what it is. We talk about the standard for the leaders, why integrity is so foundational in leadership, and why the people that we put around us has such a significant impact on our ability to lead. So I encourage you to get your Bible, get a pen and paper, and let's sit down and study the Word of God together. We're looking at Psalm 101 today, and this is a royal psalm of David, and he's setting kind of the standards for righteous rule and personal integrity. Some people call this a leadership manifesto because it talks about so many things where that is concerned. And he begins by saying, I will sing of your love and justice to you, Lord. I will sing praise. I will be careful to lead a blameless life, which we talked about earlier this week, in the book of Titus about being blameless. When will you come to me? I will conduct the affairs of my house with a blameless heart. I will not look with approval on anything that is vile. Which is interesting to hear David write these things when you think about the things that got him in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so were there any pieces of this psalm you wanted to make sure that we covered today that, this was the piece that I appreciated the most?
Well, just the psalm itself, he draws a very, very defined line about morality, integrity, living right, doing right, even who he will associate with, how he'll live it at home, he'll live it outside. And he gives us some really good guidelines to follow. His guardrails or boundaries in this psalm seem to be well established. He's going to make sure, and he lays out some very practical things. He talks about how I'm going to live in integrity. The company I keep are going to be people of integrity, and those who don't just can't be a part of that. And I think there's some really good lessons we can learn from this.
Yeah, in that same vein, I thought a lot about how clear he was about rooting out those things in your life and even refusing to be associated with those things in your life. And, that's something that God made very clear in the Old Testament to the Israelites was you cannot tolerate any of these things. And we see what happened as a result of them tolerating those things, because then eventually they adopted those things and infiltrated their society and who they were, what they believed, how they lived their lives. And so I think that sometimes we think, well, it's just everywhere and we have no choice but to at least tolerate it, and we'll just turn our eyes. But I think that these are very clear instructions of what we're actually supposed to do.
In that, how does it set a standard for leaders? What kind of standard does it set for people who are leaders?
Well, I appreciated how, if we're thinking about integrity, that we talk about being able to live, I think it even said that, like at home as you do in public, like you want to be the type of person that lives with integrity at all times, not just when people are watching you. And again, that there should be no toleration for letting any of those things infiltrate your life. It even talked about the people that you let into your life. And from the explanation that he gives for the people that he would let into his life, that he would be friends with, to be associated with, you're not going to meet very many people that fit those standards. But he says he's going to seek those things out, those people out, and that we as leaders should be doing the same thing. We should be very careful and aware.
Yeah, from a leadership perspective, in verse 6, he says, only those who are above reproach will be allowed to serve me. I think he understood the importance of who you surround yourself with, even as a leader, and whether you're the king or you're some other level, people who you allow to serve you or work with you are so important, because you tend to become more like the company that you spend your time with. And so you could be a solid person of integrity and closely associated with people who are not. And over time, that will tend to erode some of that. And he makes that very clear. And I think that's a really, really good leadership principle, is who you choose to surround yourself with.
He begins, in verse 1 talking about a blameless heart. That it's the same similar context that Titus did, that you're not open to accusation. You're not creating reasons for people to make accusations against you is the way I read it. And I think that we're reminded again today that if we do not have a standard for leaders, if we do not have some expectations of leadership, I say it this way in the church, right? Everybody is welcome. I want everybody, no matter where they come from, to walk in these doors. They're welcome. But the further you move up the food chain, the higher the expectations should be. There should be some standard of leadership. Just because you walk in the door don't mean you get a microphone, right? You don't get to be put in front of people. There are some. We need an opportunity to examine your life. And even, I think, even, in the New Testament, you distinguish, the standard isn't the same for everybody, right? Even like deacons and elders or overseers, it was different. The deacons had to have a good reputation in the church. The elders had to have a good reputation out of the church, right? So it wasn't just, okay, we've been able to observe you. The broader context of society has been able to observe you, and they may not agree with what you believe, but they observe you to have, good leadership qualities. So when we talk about those things, standards, why is integrity foundational?
Well, without integrity, all the rest of it is just stuff. I mean, you can fake some things for a while, but integrity ultimately is what you build your life, your reputation, a ministry, anything on. I think of it in these terms. There are some people that I have known for a long period of time that and this happens on occasions, where you will hear somebody say something maybe about that individual. They did this or they said this. And their integrity is such to me that my response will be something like, they may have said it, they may have done it, but until I hear it come out of their own mouth that they did, I don't even go there, just because I know that person that well. Excuse me. And I think that's what he's talking about. Living that kind of life where you're like, no, didn't happen. Just because they're that foundational and they've proven that for such a long period of time.
I think you used the word maybe a couple of days ago when we were talking about blamelessness, that it doesn't necessarily mean you don't do anything that you could get blamed for, but that is what's crossing my mind as I'm listening to Jay talk about, checking those facts with the person that it is about, as opposed to just automatically believing it. Because if you do know somebody's integrity and their character, which I do think often comes from knowing somebody for years and being able to observe their life and their actions and who they are, you have a hard time believing that those things would be true about them, because you know that you've never seen that in their character before.
Yeah.
You feel like, oh, that's probably not reliable information. But it's a really important thing. That's a really important characteristic for leaders, because if it is easy for people to believe those things about you, then they're not going to respect your leadership, much less what it is that you stand for, the example that you're trying to set, the people that you're trying to lead in the right direction.
Integrity includes telling the truth, but it's not just being truthful. Integrity is about wholeness. It comes from the same word we get integer from, which is a whole number, and when I think of integrity, there are times when I don't disagree with, and maybe sometimes think something someone has done is out of bounds or wrong. But in the context of the whole, it doesn't change how I feel about them because I see that the entirety of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Too often we're moved by instances, right? If somebody's nice to me today, they're the greatest person in the world. You know, I'm always mesmerized by my social media feed of the people who have the greatest spouse in the world today, and then 3 days later, they don't do da 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 da. You know, I get sick and tired of having it. I'm like, well, which is it?
Yeah,
right.
It's called being fickle.
Yeah, well, you're too moved by a particular instance, and not by, you know, the wholeness, the integrity of somebody's life. And as a leader, one of the things that I rest in is there are times people strongly, vehemently disagree with a choice I've made or a decision I've made, or maybe even a way that I've acted or handled something. But I believe that over time, my integrity, the wholeness of it will stand the test of time. And they'll see later, okay, maybe my emotions got the best of me. You know, because the reality is, even somebody you know that you said, I need to hear it from them, is fully capable of doing something you disapprove of, think is wrong, or maybe completely out of line. The question is, how do you put that in the context of the whole thing? And do they own it, right? Do they take responsibility for the situation? The disappointing thing is when you feel like people should have that picture, and then an instance causes them to go, no, I don't like them anymore, right?
Makes them blind.
Yeah, it does. It's situation, especially, you know, at times when they do it in where they don't have a full picture, right? It amazes me. And I think leaders have to have integrity. I think leaders who have integrity, time is their friend.
Yeah.
And over time, it shows.
Yeah, integrity is not just what you do. Sometimes it's what you don't do or how you don't respond. And so, like I said, it's a much broader picture of character and who that person is.
So what does this psalm teach us about relationships and leaders? You know, I think earlier, Jay, you mentioned he said, I'll have nothing to do with what is evil. He says, whoever is slandered, I won't tolerate. I'll put them to silence. No one who practices deceit will dwell in my house. Well, what's the importance of relationships and leadership?
I think we kind of touched on it earlier when we talked about how the things that you allow yourself to be subjected to in your life, in other words, the people and circumstances, are going to bleed over into who you become and the way that you react to things, what you accept. And, you know, again, it said that we shouldn't even tolerate people who they named lie and gossip. They shouldn't be allowed in our lives at all. And we should seek to remove wickedness and just completely from our lives. And so I think this helps us realize that we have to be, again, very careful about who we allow into our lives, because they will speak into us and how we perceive things. And there are instances in which things are thought about people that may not be correct. But in general, if you are considering a friendship or letting somebody into your life, you do need to take those things into account. You do need to take into account, like, okay, do I have any reference of their integrity or their character, the person that they've been, as Jay was saying, over a long span of time? You know, do I know this person well enough to give them this kind of access in my life? I think you have to think about those things and I don't think you have to be closed off, but I do think you have to be very purposeful about it.
Yeah, he makes two clear distinctions here about the group of people he does want to spend time with. Faithful people to be companions, those above reproach, to serve or to work with me. And then he talks about deceivers and liars and how he's got to stay away from them. And so I think there are two equally important parts. One, there are certain influences that we need to avoid at all costs because they'll bring you down. But I think as equally important is that group he talks about, faithful people who will be our companions, that will help us, that will grow us, who will draw us up to a higher level, maybe challenge us in areas where we need to be challenged in. And so to me, this is a two-part approach as relates to the people around us.
Yeah, I think the people you choose have an impact. You know, there's, as a leader, right, there are two kind of pieces to the puzzle. More than this, but there are two really critical pieces: competence and character. You want competent people, right? And you want people of character. You want them both. You want the ideal leader is the person who has both competence and character. If you got to choose one, right? If you got to be short on one, I'd rather it be short on competence than short on character, because short on character is destructive. Short on competence is demoralizing. It slows you down. It has different set of consequences, but it's not destructive. Short on character is destructive. When leaders do not have character, it can destroy the entire organization. And I think we have to be quick to deal with those things. I don't think you can not, he doesn't seem to have any mercy for it. Yeah. He said, I'll put them out, right? This is the end of the conversation. And I think that character issues are, more complicated and more destructive than competency issues.
And from a leadership perspective, I find it interesting that he had to clearly define the people he would spend his time with. Mm-hmm. The good quality people versus the not so good quality people. And then the last verse is, my daily task will be to ferret out the wicked and free the city. I think there's a great leadership principle there that on a day-to-day basis, the people in our closest circle determine whether or not we can have a bigger influence to a much larger group of people.
Thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. I just want to remind you, true leadership begins at home. This isn't just a church thing, a business thing, a government thing. It begins at home. And true leadership rejects wickedness, and it surrounds itself with faithful people. So today, practice this in your life, in your personal life. Don't wait till you get to your job or you start a business or you get elected to something. Start today in your home, rejecting wickedness and surrounding yourself with the right people. It'll make all the difference in the world. Hope you have a great day. Enjoy it. Join us again tomorrow.